Hello and welcome to iWizard. Today we're going to be taking a look at Michael Z. Williamson's A Long Time Until Now. This is the story of 10 soldiers in Afghanistan who find themselves suddenly transported back to the Paleolithic Age, back to the Stone Age. So stay tuned. All right, Jordan here. So let's start by getting into what this book is about. Here's a little synopsis. While on a mission, 10 American soldiers, part of a military unit on convoy in Afghanistan, suddenly find themselves lost in time with only their guns, their MRAP vehicles, and some portable hardware. Somehow, they have arrived in Earth's Paleolithic Asia, the late Stone Age, with no idea of how they arrived or how to get back. The shock of the event is severe. Trapped in the Stone Age, these 10 brave but homesick soldiers must rely on each other and learn to use their ingenuity, their grit, and their survival skills to start life anew in an ancient epoch. But just when they begin to adjust to Paleolithic life, things begin to get even stranger. Over the course of time, they discover that there are others, groups of the similarly displaced. Imperial Romans, Neolithic Europeans, and a small cadre of East Indian Moguls. Will these desperate groups learn to get along, or will they come to blows as they squabble over territory and fight for resources? Despite their technological advantage, the American soldiers are only 10 strong, and no one knows how to get home. Then, as if things weren't strange enough, 2 more time travelers arrive from a future far beyond the present. These time travelers may have the means to get back, but they aren't giving it up. In fact, they may have a treacherous agenda of their own, one that may very well lead to the death of the displaced in a harsh and dangerous era. Okay, so this novel really has the perfect blend of time travel and that sort of action-oriented Baen-style military science fiction that we've come to love. If you're interested in seeing what would happen if Neolithics, Paleolithics, Roman legionaries, and East Indian Moguls with muskets were all stuck together in the Stone Age with mammoths and tigers and woolly rhinos and all manner of interesting creatures, then this novel is definitely for you. But first, before we get into what I liked and what I didn't, let's get a bit of context. So A Long Time Until Now is published by Baen Books, as I mentioned. Baen does fantasy and sci-fi, and this is the first book in what Williamson is calling the Temporal Displacement Series. The second book, I have that right here, is That Was Now and This Is Then. Kind of a clever title there. And I should say that I did actually catch up with the author on Facebook, and he tells me he's busy working on the third book right now, but that he hasn't come up with a title yet. So this is the second book. By the way, a note about the author, Michael Z. Williamson. He is the author of many other books outside of this series. He's best known for his Freehold series. I read book 1 in the Freehold series, but that's all I've read. He's actually, Williamson is retired military. He was in the Army. He is a competitive shooter, I guess, and he runs a blog called Survival Blog or something like that. So this guy definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to survivalism and self-reliance and just kind of military stuff. Another piece here that I'll just add is that this book is set mostly during the Paleolithic Age, sometimes referred to as the Stone Age, as you probably know. And I think, and I could be wrong about this, but the time period that this actually takes place, I believe, is called the New Stone Age. It's like the late Paleolithic. So in the book, I believe it's about 15,000 years ago. So I guess towards the end of the Pleistocene. And you have these paleo people who are hunter-gatherers living in small bands, hunting and fishing and using stone and wood tools and all of that stuff. So without further ado, let's get into what I liked about this book. I really liked how Williamson constructed this story. You've got these American soldiers on convoy in Afghanistan. They're out on a mission, driving around in these big MRAP vehicles, and something happens. It feels like they've run over something. There's some kind of accident. It feels almost like there's been an earthquake. Everything's chaotic. Dust is kicked up. So the soldiers get their bearings and realize that the road is suddenly gone, and there's green grass all around. The weather is even different. Instead of being 100 degrees like it is in modern Afghanistan, it's closer to 80. So what the hell is going on? They think they might have gone off-road, but they're finding it difficult to retrace the path, and they can't find their own tire tracks. They've lost GPS. The radios only work with each other, so they're cut off from the base camp. They realize they're probably still in Afghanistan because the landscape around them, at least, is mostly the same, except it's grassy for some reason, and there doesn't seem to be any human presence. The sun is in a different place, and it's kind of weird that the moon is at a quarter, whereas it was just a full moon the night before. So they're not sure whether they've jumped into a parallel dimension. Maybe they've been knocked out and they're experiencing some kind of group delusion. Maybe there's been some divine intervention. Some of them are religious. Gosh, they figure maybe they've even been hit by an IED and now they're just drugged out in the ICU, imagining all of this. Or someone surmises, is it possible they've actually time traveled? So slowly but surely, this last option becomes the sort of general consensus. And now they realize if they've time traveled, there are some new questions. How do they know whether they're in the future or the past? One of the soldiers suggests it could be that future Earth is a park and aliens have brought us here as a zoo exhibit. And that is when they spot a herd of shaggy, woolly rhinos that are definitely not of their own eon. So I just loved this part of the book where the soldiers are using their brains to figure out where they are and when, using their reasoning, deductive reasoning, and critical thinking skills to try to figure everything out. That was probably my favorite element of this book. They use the stars, they use what they know about astronomy, zoology, anthropology, evolutionary history to try to locate themselves in time, and that part's really cool. There's even an interesting debate between one of the soldiers who is a creationist and a more secular guy, where the former thinks they couldn't be 20,000 years in the past because the Earth isn't that old. He's a young Earther. And the other guy is like, no, the Earth is really, really old. So just some really interesting, unexpected stuff in this book. Along with all of that, another thing I liked is that you can just tell that the author has a truly impressive knowledge of survival skills, homesteading, handicrafts, how to repair things, hunting and weaponry, all that kind of survivor man, mountain man kind of wisdom. And this is, I think, really important when you're trying to sell us on an inherently unrealistic time travel, right, premise. So it's like, yes, as you can tell, the premise here is kind of out there, but I feel like I can suspend my disbelief if, when the soldiers actually do go back in time, if it feels real, if their struggles feel real. And it really does. Even just things like, what kind of supplies will we need? What type of camp should we set up? How do we set up this camp? How do we start a fire? All of that was totally convincing. And I was especially impressed by the amount of just thought that went into every little aspect of this book. Especially when it comes to describing human beings who are used to living in the future and how they would adjust to a really alien environment, if you think about it. It's interesting because they do actually have some futuristic supplies, gadgets. They have their vehicles, they have their cell phones. The cell phones don't get service, but they use the cell phones to watch movies and listen to music. So it's interesting that you're deep in the past, but you have some modern gadgets that actually work. They have lighters, they have fresh uniforms and soap and toothbrushes and rations and extra boots and stuff like that. And they can even use parts of these huge, clunky MRAP vehicles to build up and kind of reinforce their camps. I think it was actually pretty ingenious to make it so that the military vehicles actually get to go back in time with them. And that's another thing that made this story feel so authentic, is that the author just clearly has a deep and real knowledge of military tactics, strategies, rules, military hierarchy, just simple procedural things. Like when the soldiers meet in the beginning, they keep enough distance from each other so they don't become easy mass targets. just Williamson's ability to capture the way real military people talk. There's this whole part of the book where the first lieutenant who is in charge kind of struggles with leadership. He's scared. He doesn't know where he is, and he's not really up to the task. So you have to kind of grapple with questions of leadership. But I think when it comes down to it, the most impressive, most entertaining, most valuable facet of this book is that the author shows pretty much step by step how to create a working village, a kind of Iron Age village from the ground up. And it all makes sense, from building a forge to metalworking, to performing surgery on people when you don't even have the right implements, how to find natural remedies for health problems that everyone has because they're obviously running out of their medicines. There's just so much practical know-how and compelling sort of survival techniques in this book. I even learned how to make condoms out of goat guts, right? So much of this book is just kind of following the troop of soldiers as they rely on their self-reliance skills and their handiness to survive, to build fences, to domesticate livestock, to even build a sweat lodge, right? So if all of that appeals to you, this really is the book for you if you're that type of survivalist-minded person. And I was thinking about it the other day too. I don't know if any of you have ever played that Desert Island game where you have to pick one of each item to bring with you because you're stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life. But I was thinking that I might actually pick this book, not because it's the best book I've ever read or because I loved it so much that it's the only book I would want to have with me, but mostly because it's actually a survival guidebook. Right? When you read this, yes, it's fiction, but it does kind of read like a voluminous guide to figuring out how to survive and living off of the land and being kind of self-reliant. So I really did like that aspect of the book. Okay, what else? I also loved the paleo people in this book, and also the culture shock that the soldiers experience when they realize how different they are, how friendly and surprisingly sexually open they are when they arrive at the paleo settlement. The native women are trying to bed the soldiers, the men. The chief is offering young women to Lieutenant Elliot as concubines. The paleo men are stroking the two female officers. And yet they're very hospitable and nice. They're just not used to the kind of modern sexual repression that we have. And so the author has clearly done a lot of research on this period, and he just makes an effort to get the paleo people right, even down to how utterly horrible they would smell. And they do smell really bad in this book. And so some of the single men have this dilemma. You know, a lot of the paleo women are gross and they smell bad and they look different, but there aren't many other options, right? So if you're going to be there a while, what do, right? Do you practice abstinence, or do you hook up with these ancient proto women, right? Speaking of, I thought the author did a good job just generally representing the plight of women in a pre-modern, pre-industrial, Paleolithic era. Of the 10 soldiers that actually get sent back, 2 of them are women. There's Gina Alexander, and the other one is Caswell. And so if you're one of these women and you're stuck in the Paleolithic, and you've been lifted out of your modern society with its rights and its privileges and its norms and its mediating institutions, it's kind of like Lord of the Flies. If you remember that scene from Lord of the Flies when Roger is throwing stones near another boy, I believe it's Henry, but he realizes that his arm is conditioned not to throw the stone too close to Henry, that even in the absence of police or authority figures or the rule of law, there's still a lingering taboo of the old world, which kind of creates an invisible force field around each person. And if you've read Lord of the Flies in high school, you'll know this is one of the major themes, is that civilization's taboos begin to slowly fade away. And it's about what happens when you strip the thin veneer of civilization away from human beings. How do they start to act? Well, it's pretty clear in Lord of the Flies. They start to act out their ids, the beast from within. comes out. And so you get scenes from the perspective of these two American women, Caswell and Alexander, just about the constant fear that they have that I think is realistic, that they're going to get raped. Worrying that the men will go crazy and start fighting to the death over them. It's like in this Paleolithic time, if you have a vagina, the men are going to come after you. That is just the reality of a primal age. You can try to evoke the veneer of civilization. You can try to disconnect the way people behave from fundamental sexual characteristics, but none of that matters in a state of nature. There are men and there are women, and there's the reality of violence, war, rape, and savage desire. These are the brute facts of human nature that no Orwellian regime can erase or change. So you really get the reality of living in this time. And there are other issues too. I mean, the author really does think of everything. You get to watch as these soldiers deal with the frustration of not knowing how long they're going to be stuck in the past, while also dealing with the depression that comes along with realizing that you're living in a world in which all progress has been set back tens of thousands of years, and just things you wouldn't even think of, like, should we celebrate Christmas even though Christ hasn't even been born yet? At one point, one of the guys says, I miss my wife and kids, but they're not missing me because they haven't even been born yet, right? And I think that realization is just so crushing and earth-shattering. And so there's real depression in this, and even questions about, by being back in time, am I changing or affecting the future? Are we going to cause the butterfly effect? Or even like assuming that we're stuck here and we're never going to get back, what will future archaeologists or scientists think when they excavate our MRAP vehicles, right, or our bones? Okay, finally, let's get to what I disliked about this book. There are some things here that I want to bring up. I'm not going to pretend that this is by any means a perfect book. I wasn't expecting it to be. I was kind of, to be honest, mostly looking for a sort of ridiculous but fun, pulpy adventure. You can see from the book cover that is what this offers, and that is the kind of thing that is characteristic of Baen books. I was looking for a gritty, action-oriented, kind of guilty pleasure beach read sort of book, and I'm happy to say that it was that and much more, but there were a couple of shortcomings for me. The first thing that I'll mention is that I didn't like the omniscient POV. The perspective here just kind of jerks around from person to person for the entire novel. Along with that, the characters aren't always well differentiated, at least at the beginning. It does get better, I would say, as the story goes on, but there were many moments when it felt like all of the characters in this book were Michael Z. Williamson. And I'm not saying that there isn't a part of the author in all of the characters. That's obviously true, and it's unavoidable since Williamson is the one who's writing them. But there were just times when I felt the characters weren't well-rounded enough, I guess. Another thing, and this, to be honest, is probably the most frustrating part of the novel, I found it to be highly unrealistic that these random soldiers are all basically Rhodes Scholars. One soldier would explain complex astronomy to everyone and would use the stars to locate them in time. This other guy, Oglesby, would give a discourse on the roots of certain cognates in language and how to develop pidgin languages to communicate with the natives. Another soldier would give some casual professorial discourse on anthropology. Every soldier in this book seems to conveniently have a PhD's worth of knowledge about several arcane subjects that most people you meet in reality know nothing about. Every soldier has some too perfect on-the-nose expertise or training. One of them is Wiccan, so she knows how to do stuff with herbs and healing rituals and that kind of thing. Two of them have Native American ancestry and know special stuff. One of them is both a medic and the most impressive astronomy expert you've ever met, who can just tell where they are in the grand scope of history by looking at the stars. Another one can forge and beat tools. Another soldier, Alexander, is like, yeah, definitely, no problem. I can stitch leather using animal sinew. No problem. That's easy. One guy can distill oil from hemp or vegetables to make diesel. Another guy is somehow a former rancher who knows how to make milk and cheese and domesticate animals. Some of the soldiers know how to make steel. How to set up a still. There's a guy who knows beekeeping just magically. And so it's really, I guess, far-fetched that each person here has some savant-like, brilliant, esoteric knowledge that just so happens to be relevant to whatever the group needs to accomplish. I'll give you an example. When they first spot the Indian Moguls who are marching with the Romans, this one soldier somehow has such an impressive knowledge of Roman history that he's able to look at the Roman legionaries' armor and somehow locate the exact century that they came from. And they start speaking very competent, almost fluent Latin to the Roman soldier. And then it turns out that another officer who just happens to be sitting there knows a decent amount of Hindi somehow. So this guy is able to speak to the East Indians as well. So it's just, I guess, kind of ridiculous that between them, these soldiers, and keep in mind, oftentimes non-officer military people never even go to college, and I'm not insulting them. Trust me, I come from a military family. I'm a Navy brat. I grew up in military housing, but the reality is that most modern people cannot do any of the stuff that I've been describing. So I felt like it was a bit far-fetched that these random 10 soldiers could do all of these things. Speaking of, another thing is just a minor kind of nitpicky thing. I wish we'd actually gotten to spend more time with the Romans. I feel like there could have been a lot of potential there. I mean, if you're going to put ancient Romans in your story, I feel like there's so much more you could have done. On the other hand, maybe not. And this is going to get into my last criticism of this book, is that I definitely like big books, and I cannot lie about that. And especially when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi, there's a lot of world building that you have to do. And I totally get it. I find it frustrating when people read a big chunky book that I really like and they tell me, oh, it could have been cut in half. And I'm like, no, it could not be cut in half. No, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens could most definitely not be cut in half. That said, while I wouldn't recommend that this book be cut in half, there was TMI in a lot of places. And I really do think that it could have been cut by a third. I think that if I'm being realistic, the trade paperback, mass market paperback edition of this book is like 942 pages. So that's definitely too long for a book of this nature. And I just think there was definitely a TMI in a lot of places. This is one of those books that you really needed an editor to come in and say, this has to be cut out, this has to be cut out. There were even places where I was reading this book and I was saying to myself, oh God, all of this could be cut out and it would make for a better story. And actually, now that we're on the subject of TMI, I want to just say here, just as a kind of clarification point, I am no prude, I promise you. I don't even get along well with people who are prudes. Swearing doesn't bother me very much. I don't mind sex or violence in books as long as it's not super gratuitous. But there were times when the writing here I felt was too graphic. Not in the Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian sort of way, but with the constant shitting, the pissing, guys shooting their food for the day, hitting a nursing mother, and then shooting its baby out of mercy, and then drinking the mother's goat milk right out of its teats. Even some of the ailments that people suffered from, like one of the paleo women who had fecal matter coming out of her vagina because she had some fissure or tear that connected to her rectum. Just all of it was explained in too much detail, and it never stopped, and it was kind of gross, and it even went into the kind of surgery that they had to do to fix the paleo woman's vagina. Just TMI. All right, we're running out of time, so that is going to have to do it for us, unfortunately. I had a lot of fun with this book, despite my criticisms. There were some really surprisingly deep conversations and reflections in this book about time and philosophy and history and human hierarchies, and some interesting religious debates about whether culture influences religion or does religion influence culture more. Some fascinating debates about the best ways to engage with ancient patient people, how to speak with them, how to treat them, how to be hospitable to them. So this was a really good time. I think I might even read book 2 this summer, and I'm looking forward to that. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Hang out with me on Goodreads, Facebook, and if you can, tip your starving booktuber by going to Patreon and donating a little bit there. And until next time, happy reading, my friends.